Hi, thanks for tuning in to our Practical Nerds weekly podcast. I'm Shubh, and together with my partner and co host Patrick, we normally invest in founders in design, construction, renovation, and logistics technology. Many of our friends in the ecosystem wanted us to start a podcast on the built world, and in return, we decided to honor their request with a show about nothing at all.
Always good to hear that.
I mean, always useful to remind ourselves that it's really about nothing at all, right?
I came
Uh,
unprepared.
how can you possibly prepare for nothing?
I have no answer.
Nice. Nice. Hey, so I was, I think something led me to rereading your post from ACVC the other day, Patrick, about truck shortages or truck driver shortages, I should say, in Europe. And obviously, I think you and I are both well aware there's quite a big discussion, which also tends to polarize a lot of people, obviously, around immigration and the need for people, etc., the influx of them in Europe.
Right.
Um, but I think you hit quite hard on a few interesting points about how significant the truck driver shortage is in Europe. What are you seeing about this market?
And this relates to the built world for a very specific reason to me. So just to put it into the context of also why we love this space so much, before I get into the factoids there. But I always like to say that the built world runs on two things. It runs on 3D,
Uh huh.
because that's how the built world gets designed and also captured, and it runs on people. And the people, we tend to think always construction side, but it's actually a whole lot of logistics and the people
Yeah.
that drive those trucks, right? So let me start off with a few factoids that I had shared a few weeks ago on AECVC. So 77% of the freight in the EU is transported by trucks. Number of trucks, 6.2 million. Okay, so quite relevant. And right now, we're about 460,000 truck drivers short within the EU plus UK, which is roughly 10%. So we currently have a gap of about 10% with these 460,000 truck drivers. And where they are employed, like the top 5 countries, pretty much all equally the same, is about 70 to 80,000 short in each of those 5 markets, is Germany, UK, Turkey, Poland, Romania. And then all others together might make another like 70 to 80,000. That's how you get to this like roughly 500,000 of gap, right? Within the UK, actually, if you just look at that market, this gap increased by 10% just in 2021. So it's getting really bad. And then 2022, actually, the war in Ukraine started with the Russian
Yeah.
invasion. And unfortunately, there was a lot of Ukrainian skilled truck drivers that were actually part of the workforce that we're talking to. So the 260,000 actually might have gotten increased in 2022 by another 230,000, which were the
Mm.
Ukrainian truck drivers. Sorry, Ukrainian plus on top, but for that I don't have a number, Belarusian truck drivers. Now the
I see.
Belarusian borders are much more close than they were prior to 2022. So
Hmm.
probably the 460,000 got increased by another 170 to 250,000,
Yeah.
right? When you look at the on the job ad side, 40% of jobs are unfilled, according to the truck
Hmm.
drivers and logistics associations in Europe. 40% of jobs do not get filled,
Hmm.
right? We do see how the logistics industry is reacting to that with increasing the wages. So in the UK in 2021, the average truck driver wage increased 20%. And still, we're not finding enough people willing to do the job. The average age is close to 50. So a lot of workforce is going to go out of job, like in many other blue collar jobs,
Yeah.
right? 25% of the truck drivers in employment working in the EU are above 55.
Wow.
That's 1 million truck drivers of the 5 million that we need are above 55 years old. They will leave the job by 2030.
That, of course. I think if it wasn't already clear, means that this number that we're sitting at, which might be 460,000, might be a lot higher.
Hmm.
It will not stay at just 460,000
That's
10
right.
years from now, right? I think you put out some scary predictions. What does that look like 10 years from now if nothing is fixed immediately?
Yeah, by 2030, we're missing 1.5 million truck drivers.
Oh, wow. Well, that's quite dramatic.
But it's
Yeah.
fixable because if you think about what is actually the reasons why this job has so many unfilled positions. In a lot of blue collar jobs, the answers can oftentimes be physical strain, can be health conditions that the physical strain does on you. It can be that you work a lot outside under the sun, which comes with other problems,
Hmm.
etc. So in truck driver, that's a blue collar job that has slightly different reasons for why they remain unfilled, and like the top four reasons that you find when you talk to founders in the space, but also logistics operators, is that number one, the time at home is really, really bad for a lot of these truck
Yeah.
drivers. They tend to be on the road for a lot of weeks. And then, the time at home in between the assignments is not as high as they, would require to have a healthy
Yeah.
uh, family life. A lot of time pressure to get
Hmm.
milestones done because logistics companies oversell on the times that can be achieved, and the person on whose back that promise is then fulfilled is the truck driver. So there's a lot
Yeah.
of time pressure. Number three, the loading unloading conditions. There is physical strain
Hmm.
that you're having to do. And then finally, hygienic conditions, like they
Yeah.
are quite bad. By the way, that includes also where can I park. So that's less of a US topic, but that's a very big topic in the EU actually, where you can find ample parking space to get your rest times, and then
Hmm.
also find hygienic conditions. So if someone can actually fix all of these with a new age employment model, I think you're in for building potentially a very large company.
Yeah. I mean, look, I had recently also met up with the founder who's attempting to solve for this space. And I think there's a few different interpretations of what a winning model could look like. Some of the facts thrown at me, my mind was blown. So I think all the facts you just said, Patrick, about just how tough it is for truck drivers in Europe, it's true. And I think in many other markets like India, and I presume it's very true in other emerging markets as well, it's amplified so much more, obviously in a worse direction,
Mm.
right? To give you an idea, I mean, one fact I got was people who are currently truck drivers in India are willing to put out as an upfront expenditure or investment as much as their year's worth of earnings, an entire year worth of earnings, uh, for the potential to upskill and be considered for a truck driving job in Europe. That should tell
Oh
you a whole
wow!
lot. That should tell you a whole lot, right? About I think it's that factoid alone says so many things. It reveals, I guess, just how much worse the both the earning power and the conditions are for truck drivers are in markets like India, and I think we could extrapolate to several other markets. But it also tells you maybe that the deficit of people, and in this particular case, truck drivers in Europe, is going in a direction where the willingness to pay is also magnifying in a direction where people are willing to put out that sort of money for a shot. Mind you, it's not a guarantee. For a shot at an opportunity. Um, my mind was blown, and it fills me with sadness, but also excitement and hope at this state of affairs. That
I mean, if
it's
you
a very
think of this as an employment opportunity, or as an opportunity for someone to build a new age employer,
Mhm.
and you think in Venn diagrams, which I love to do, there is a Venn diagram of holy crap, we're missing soon 1.5 million truck drivers in the EU, and
Yeah,
holy crap, I would like to be a truck driver in the EU. There's a big overlap there from what I'm hearing
yeah.
from you.
I would 100% agree with that. And I think the fact that it can manifest to such a degree where the intersection means people are willing to put out a year's worth of money
Wow.
to make it to for a shot at it. that screams to me like an opportunity that is begging to be taken, begging to be
I
solved.
agree. I
Yeah.
agree. I would talk to an amazing founder team in that space right away.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Me too. And I think um, the interesting fact, right? And I think we've discussed this in some of our earlier episodes. It's a fascinating time in the world where, in some markets, there's just we don't have any clue where how we're filling these positions, how to get enough people to do so many essential jobs, and in so many other markets there's just way too many people and you have no idea where to put them in, right? It's fascinating how these things are overlapping in an interesting time with all of the other things going on in the global scheme of things.
What do you think should be the like what features or what avatar should a business that capitalizes on that issue and fixes the issue,
Hmm.
um, what should they represent?
I think so. It could. I think skilling is a crucial underrepresented layer. I think what I mean by skilling is, and if I were a founder, choosing to build deep expertise on the skilling side versus a tech platform that also enables skilling. Uh, I think these two may sound similar, but I think you and I understand there's enormous differences in the two, right? I think because the problem, the way it exists today, exists in such core grassroots a manner. You can't just be a tech platform enabling skilling because the basic skill level doesn't exist. You can't enable skilling where the infrastructure or the certification or the standards for administering it don't exist. You have to aspire to become the standard to administer that skilling. And therefore, what I would actually look at is opportunities that aspire to become the skilling, the immigration, the employment enabling layer, to be perfectly honest, with or without tech, right?
I
Whatever it
like that.
takes to build deep moats in those aspects.
I like that because there's like a must-have skill for everyone, and that is the license. But try to
Hmm.
get a license in Europe if you're actually not in Europe. So
Yeah.
how do you do that, right? Or how do you get your local license that you might be having? How do you get certified to do that
Hmm.
in Europe? So that's inaccessible for someone who is abroad. That's a classic accessibility problem. So I think there's that feature that can help. On the skilling also, there might be soft skills,
Hmm.
how to treat customers, how to treat the suppliers, etc. That where you can actually set a standard.
Yeah.
I think that's quite important. And then beyond this, the skilling is for me is a backbone here. And then on top of that, what I really love about this is so when you think about the earnings opportunity for truck drivers, there's the magnitude of your wage. We've discussed that. There's quite a significant earnings opportunity for people, moving cross border into an economy like the European Union or the UK.
Yeah.
But it's also what you can do with that wage, and I'm talking about bankability here. So
Hmm.
if you're an independent freelance truck driver, you're not very bankable for a lot of banks.
Yeah.
Think getting a mortgage. You don't
Hmm.
have that employer, you don't have that steady salary from that one employer that is very reputed. Getting
Yeah, just before you move on, I think another unique insight I think both you and I are familiar with. The other thing which gets in the way of their bankability is banks, and again, especially European banks, like the concept or the idea of, hey, this is this one particular address where this individual is based, which is so much
right,
harder and trickier with truckers.
right. That's exactly right.
Yeah,
And that one address and that one employer
exactly.
that I can reference and so but hey, as a freelance truck driver, um, that track record and history of payroll and address does not work in your favor.
Hmm.
So now you're excluded from a lot of basic financing products, which and by definition then also excluded from a lot of quality of life products like buying a home
Hmm.
through a mortgage. So now on top, so let me bring that full circle now to the features of such a business. You're becoming the employer on record, or at least the payroll on record
Hmm.
for that person, for that truck driver. And that
Yeah.
truck driver might become able to finally show a steady flow of pay slips with one de facto, call it employer, call it service provider that puts them into jobs, even if the jobs are freelance, it looks much more consistent and less volatile. And I think
Mhm.
that's actually a big value proposition for several participants in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm, as I said, it makes me sad to uncover a few things about the state of affairs, but I'm also very optimistic and actually very excited to see how some of these new age models solve these problems, because I think it's a massive money making opportunity. No two ways around it. But I think it could be quite transformative in the true sense
Yeah,
of the word. Not
agreed.
transformative in the sense many of us VCs tend to overuse the word.
Agreed. I mean, it would be economically transformative for Europe potentially, and then on an individual level, you could put a lot of people into great living conditions.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah, we have a comment here on LinkedIn. Actually, Jimmy is also commenting that a freight relay model for the time at home. I think that's the context of the comment here, to maximize time at home, where you can also combine that potentially with a freight relay model, where you make someone. I think this is think US East Coast West Coast route,
yeah,
right? So if you actually are able to share the route or split it in 4 routes, and you're able to have workers East Coast to, I hope my geography knowledge is okay here, but let's say East Coast to maybe, I don't know, Detroit to
hmm,
Kansas, and then maybe Kansas to Los Angeles.
yeah,
Everybody gets to enjoy more time at home. So I
yeah,
think that's potentially another feature that you could build into a business like this.
yeah. I think so. As an end state, I think that would definitely be a very nice end state to get to. I think the crucial thing, and I think we're in the, or hopefully we're in the building phase of such solutions getting built. It needs someone to have the ability to plan for all of these operational hurdles from day one. Because if you also plan for relay at the same time as you're planning for a skilling and so on and so forth, it's quite the operational challenge. It may
Yeah.
require giving up on control or complexity on some other things. So I think that is more on individual founders or individual companies to figure out what they choose, where they choose to excel, and what
To
is
pull off
okay.
to pull off a relay model, you do need portfolio of truck drivers. So to get
Mhm.
there, you might want to start more in the, like, what you've seen how Uber grew or whatever. More
Yeah.
maybe not city by city, because it's always intercity for truck
Mhm.
drivers, but more like a region by region approach,
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
or a route by route approach. That might be another one.
You mean like point A to point B and point B to point A?
Yeah, similar how ocean freight forwarders would operate.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, cool model. So I guess, hey, if you're building this and you think of yourself as the highest caliber of founders, love to talk to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, we spoke about just ocean freight rates. Actually, that's
Oh,
another
yeah.
thing we wanted to chat about.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think it's one of those things which is ever present and always so interesting as a indicator, sometimes a leading indicator, sometimes a lagging indicator of what's where actually the world's excitement or lack of excitement lies. So just the other episode we were talking about how cross-border supply chains, the time is right, or we have a window of opportunity for rebuilding the next generation of these cross-border supply chain firms, and I think that is 100% true in terms of our excitement lying there. So, a colleague and I, we were just looking into the numbers. It is quite fascinating, I have to say. I knew that in general, there's been a fall in freight rates. And what I mean by freight rates is like a more or less standard rate for that day or that month to transport a single container, either a 20-foot container or a 40-feet container,
Mhm.
from point A, which will be some country, to another country, say from US to China, or India to the US, or India to China, something along think these corridors. The rates have fallen by something like 80 to 85% in the last 10 months. Um,
Wow.
with I think the peak we had was around, if I remember correctly, around April, May of 2022. So maybe in response to the Ukraine invasion. And since then, it's been a precipitous fall. Like so, in other words, think of it like this: if you were a business involved in moving, say, 100 containers a year ago, and you're still moving 100 containers, and nothing else changed about your business,
Hmm.
you have basically shrunk 85%. So that's
Wow,
the impact. That's the impact of what's just happened.
that's
So
mind blowing.
it's quite fascinating, right? And keep in mind, no matter what you hear out there, a very large chunk of things we consume are still transported through oceanic freight. Things of all kinds, right? So
The built world is physical.
that is true. Like a lot of things, especially finished goods, manufactured goods, a very large proportion in most economies is either made for export or is imported. Um, yeah. So I mean, uh,
Imagine you're a logistics firm, shipping provider, and
mhm.
you, you got you got suckered into this pig cycle, and
Uh-huh.
you rolled up, you acquired shipping companies beginning of
Uh-huh.
2022 or April 2022 when, at peak.
Yeah.
Probably not a fun
Yeah.
place
You
to
you'll
be.
probably you'll probably at the very least need to find some ways to up your game. Either improve operations, somehow find a way to reduce costs, find something which is counter-cyclical to the reduction in container rates,
Hmm.
etc., etc. Right? Um, I think it's also it's a more long lasting trend. But Patrick, if you recall, in I think the early days of the COVID induced lockdowns we had. So there were certain
Mhm.
markets that we were operating in where it literally went from like 100 to zero overnight, right? And it stayed that way for
Right.
like a month or two. And I think at that point we were wondering, hey, how long will this last? I think now I think we no longer remember that we even had such times, but it's a crucial reminder. Even if we zoom out, I think the best companies that we have seen both in and outside our portfolio took that as an interesting point to decide, hey, we'll do something else to just hedge the business to make it more resilient.
Very true.
And that's what I definitely hope to see with founders. I think more than
So
oceanic freight, it's a reminder that nothing might be truly insulated from a random or uncontrollable change that maybe we take something for granted, but it can like change on you in a very adverse way.
yeah, and there are these cyclical parts of the value chain of overall industries. I mean, logistics is notoriously known for that.
Yeah.
I think construction, by the way, has that same reputation with, let's say, very generalized contexts or people that maybe haven't spent as much time in construction, which I always find actually deeply wrong because
Mhm.
new construction for residential, that's cyclical. New construction for offices, that's cyclical. New construction for infrastructure, that's cyclical.
Yeah.
Renovation, that's cyclical. But if
Hmm.
you take all of that as the same industry where people can be put to work onto asset class one, two, three, four, it's actually not cyclical at all. It just shifts. You
Yeah.
saw that in 2008, 2009. New construction for renovation in the US plummeted. What went up? Renovation. What went
Yeah.
up? Infrastructure. We're seeing the same thing right now. The infrastructure order books are full.
Yeah.
Office new construction, I mean, if you're only doing that, you're right now trying to find some innovative ways. We have through one of our portfolio companies, we have an insight that one of the largest um, prefabricated residential home builders in Europe,
Hmm.
like very, very large, not a startup, has been around for, I don't know, 6, 7 decades, I guess.
Okay.
Think of it like a European version of a Lennar homes, but more
Uh-huh.
prefabricated. Because the residential new construction plummets, but renovation grows exceptionally fast, they're putting their workforce onto a new renovation product they have just launched. That's what I'm talking about, right? So people, when they think of cyclical of construction as a cyclical industry, the asset classes are cyclical. The industry
Yeah.
is not.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know I steered us away from freight rates, but I just wanted to make that
No,
point
no,
in the context of
you're,
logistics.
you're absolutely right. And I think, uh, look, I think in some industries, not necessarily all, but I think cyclicality is, for better or worse, part of the game. I also think if it's also a harsh reminder that if either as a founder you've built a business to only sort of be looking good at the peak of the cycle, or if as an investor your entire thesis is
Mhm.
built on a company doing well at the peak of the cycle, but it completely falls apart in an unsustainable way at the bottom of the cycle, then I mean it's not really a sustainable business. In fact, it's nothing at all.
You can apply
With
that.
yeah.
You can apply that to VC fund construction. By the way, I think I had this in a panel discussion. I can't get the year right. Let's say 2 years ago, about that time,
Hmm.
which was about PropTech versus ConTech.
Hmm.
And there's a huge difference in the two asset classes. First of all, too many people lump it together wrongly anyway,
Yeah.
because the way you
Yeah.
optimize are very, very different. But even from a portfolio construction perspective on a VC level, PropTech is pretty much two asset classes, residential and office.
Hmm.
Everything else is minuscule in what asset classes the PropTech startups serve. Those
Yeah.
asset classes plummet, your startups are in for a rougher ride.
Yeah.
So when you as a VC fund are in prop tech, you feel some cyclicality potentially.
Hmm.
In ConTech, you're covering every asset class you want. You cover new
Yeah.
construction of residential, you cover new construction of office, you cover new construction of infrastructure, you cover renovation, you cover
Hmm.
logistics new construction.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not cyclical because the workforce and the money gets shifted between the asset classes. That's a big difference to PropTech.
Yeah. 100%. 100%.
So I'm glad we are where we are.
Yeah.
Cool. I also promised you some interesting factoids about bricklaying and the robotics opportunity.
You did.
Um,
I'm really quite interested to hear. I mean, I must admit, I have hardly done any research on these themes. Can't claim to have come across too many opportunities directly myself. So, all ears, sir.
it got triggered for me about a year ago when we saw one of the most talented robotics teams in the US and Europe that we have seen within 5 years. I can't
Hmm.
share, we're still sort of in semi stealth. So, and also we don't want to do any portfolio company advertising on this show. So that's not the point. Um, but they look into or build robotics for bricklaying automation. Now, for context, bricklaying first thought comes to mind for many people like myself. You're thinking of red bricks, like made of
Hmm.
clay, etc. That is part of it. Bricks can also be concrete stones, for example. These are typically like larger blocks. You can somehow lump them together with cinder blocks. So think of that. So bricks, there's a variety of that gets used in several markets in the US and a lot in Europe.
Hmm.
And so that triggered it for me. We've been partnering with these founders for a year. Unbelievable technology, really. I mean, I've seen it in action just recently, and so impressed with what it can do. And that actually then led me to writing a new AECVC piece. I hope to publish here next year with next week with a few numbers here. So let me get you those. So I've used the UK market as a representative market between Europe, but also the markets in the US that would
Hmm.
use bricks a lot. So within the UK, you sell 150 million bricks per year, 150 million. And the number of bricklayers that put these 150 million bricks in place, similar to the truck drivers now.
Hmm.
36% of jobs are difficult to fill. We have about
Hmm.
60,000 bricklayers, graduate about 2,000 bricklayers per year, so about 3% of the workforce, but we're already at 15,000 short. So about
So just to clarify, Patrick, what you're saying is there's 60,000 people only and exclusively just doing bricklaying
That is correct. That is correct. And
in
we
the
would
UK.
need in the UK about 75,000. Yeah. And we're
Excellent.
graduating 2,000
Yeah.
every year. Now, the average age, I actually haven't looked that up, but it's probably also around the 50s, right? So again, shortage of workforce to put 150 million bricks in place just in the UK.
Mhm.
So that's quite difficult. And then the other thing that I found interesting is, okay, so there's that workforce impact that we have to deal with, and the other one is that there's a life and business impact to the economy, because what does it mean in terms of houses that do
Yeah.
not get constructed? So when you do need between 7,000 to 15,000 bricks for an average building in the UK.
Hmm.
Let's work with maybe 7.5, just, or we can work with 10,
Sure.
whatever. And a commercial building is about 10 times bigger, so it needs 70,000 to maybe 150,000. It gets fully built with that. So that's a huge number of homes that you actually don't get to build because you're short 20% of the workforce that you actually need, short of
Yeah.
15,000 bricklayers. And
Yeah.
typically you say that a bricklayer can, on an average, lay 600 to 800 bricks per day. There are actually, fun fact, there are actually competitions where bricklayers
Uh-huh.
compete by speed, how many
Oh,
bricks they can lay
wow.
in an hour. So there they
That
can
was fun
go.
to watch. That was fun to watch. I
Yeah,
wasn't
I would
aware.
watch that.
Yeah.
That's almost like the lumberjack games. Sorry, I know I keep monologuing, so let me cut it short. But like on these games, they can do like 1,000 bricks an hour, or I've anecdotally heard but not seen it that someone claims they did 1,200 per hour. But you
Okay.
can't do that on average because there's work preparation. You need to put the
Yeah.
mortar on, you need to prepare the mortar. There's just physical strain. So to do it for an hour with good preparation, possible, but not on average. On average, you can
Yeah.
do 600 to 800 if you're experienced with all the preparation that you need to do, right? So that's a lot of homes you can't build because you're short 15,000 people just in the UK.
Wow. And I'm sure the fewer people you have, or the more losses you have, notional losses you have, because there's a shortage of people who can't put as many bricks in place. I'm sure that has an indirect inflationary aspect to the home values, or the cost of, maybe not home value, but certainly the cost of building, I would imagine.
It must. I mean, we've seen how the last 10 years the home or the real estate has inflated, and we thought that with economic tightening, quantitative tightening,
Hmm.
we would be successful to put an end to that. I actually think it's not happening for a lot of the real estate. There is real
Yeah.
estate where it certainly doesn't rise anymore, and there might also be
Mhm.
real estate that drops, especially the one that is energetically unsound and falls into the lowest category of energetic efficiency. Of course, you have that. But if you want to put something new in place or you want to renovate, that's not getting cheaper, exactly
Yeah.
due to that. I mean, the material bottlenecks we might be fixing, especially with cross-border models, which we discussed,
Yeah.
but the labor bottlenecks remain. And so that's why I'm so keen on getting robotics onto construction sites.
Hmm. Yeah. Fascinating. I'm very keen to see some of these robotic solutions, including obviously the one you spoke about, Patrick. Um, seeing them more in action in a commercial deployment, and I'm sure that time is very close upon us. Actually,
Definitely. How
yeah.
is that in Asian markets, in emerging markets? You have a different labor pool, don't you?
So I think so. Only a very small. There's not too many workers who would be designated purely as bricklayers. I have to imagine. I think there might be, but I think because there's such a large labor surplus in markets like India, for example, or in many other Southeast Asian or African markets, the way you actually improve your ability to earn, if I may say so, on a daily wage basis, is you don't present yourself just as a bricklayer, right? You sort of present yourself as maybe a mason and a
Hmm.
bricklayer and maybe one or two other things rolled in. right? And you maybe you're doing certain jobs for a few days at a time, then you switch over to doing a few other things, and that's how you improve your earnings potential.
I see.
Um, of course, now you can call it a luxury or you can call it a market reality. The market distorts in that direction because of a labor surplus situation. Is it the does it lead to the best implementation or execution? I would argue probably not. Does
So
it lead to
that
the best worker conditions? Probably also not.
what's the prospect then, or what does it say about the prospects of robotics on-site construction within emerging markets?
Fascinatingly, I would argue there's the first lever of improvement, maybe not disruptive, but maybe the easier or the lower uh, fruit to grab in this opportunity is actually again skilling, interestingly enough. So instead of treating it as a problem of the masses, you just throw a whole bunch of people at the problem, and
Mm.
then by the power of sheer numbers, things get built
Mm.
or done. You maybe you train a smaller group of people who you commit to making skilled and well trained, and who, as a result, are much more productive and therefore are more reliable, and therefore you don't have, for example, the additional cost of inspection, additional cost of repairs perhaps, which you're taking for granted, right? All of these things also add up eventually. And lest we forget, cost of churn and people moving on to other things, which is obviously a reality if you have the approach of everyone doing everything all the time.
So
And I think
skilling over robotics in emerging markets.
I would say so. I would say so. Yeah,
Funnily, when
because
you described the throwing the bodies, I was briefly thinking you were starting to talk about some of the VCs out there.
oh, maybe I was, maybe maybe I was. Um, oh man, the more I think of it, the approach of hey, just throwing a whole bunch of bodies at a problem and hoping the problem gets solved. It may not be as far from the VC model as it may be surprisingly close.
Yep. Oh gosh.
Nice. I guess on that note, on I guess bodies piling up and whatnot, um, there's these interesting discussions we've had, and it's quite interesting that they're converging just in the last week or so. I mean, I'm sure it's been going on for a while, but
Mm.
it's fascinating how these themes are sort of coming to like a climax right now of these large growth funds, family offices with deep interest, deep pools of capital, etc., really getting excited about buying up shares from companies like venture-backed companies, and like really seeing it as the time to do all of this, and like using it as an opportunity to build up large stakes, buy out companies, buy out existing shareholders. What do you make of it?
What is the discounts on the last valuation that you have been seeing over I don't know, I guess recently, but over the last year or so?
Um, if you're a high performing company, which is um, lower than a unicorn valuation, as in not yet a unicorn, and
Okay.
when I say high performing, as in you have um, a distinctly proven ability to justify, based on the new norms, a higher valuation than your previous round. Now, with all of these qualifiers, which was obviously also a mouthful for me to say, with all of these qualifiers, right, I think it would probably start at 20% at the very least.
Mm.
Now, the thing is, all the qualifiers I just laid out, Patrick, there's a very, very small set of companies anywhere in the world, right? If you add up all of the
Handful.
companies, right, it's a very small list. If you're not any of these, and I think you and I are privy to what's happening in some of these rounds, I think if you take a bulk look, most of them, the lowest discount is 50%. I think quite a
Mm.
few are much deeper discounts, much deeper.
Mm.
In the 70, I think there are cases of higher discounts than that as well, actually.
I mean, what do I make of it? It's So what we're seeing is that there's very professional funds, very established funds that have been around for decades, and we think of very highly when we hear their names as VC investors,
Mhm.
even fund of fund investors that get into
Yeah.
the secondary game with eagerness.
Uh-huh.
And for them, my anecdotal evidence, it's very, very limited. Starts at 30 to 40% discount to buy out an existing shareholder in a business that has, maybe starting 5 to 7 million ARR on a software
Yeah.
business.
Hmm.
And so what I make of that is, so A, been massively overvalued in the past, not a surprise, that's been amply discussed.
Yeah.
But B, actually rightly valued in the long term.
Yeah.
Because otherwise
Yeah.
I wouldn't be getting in the first place. So you should take it as a sign of validation if you're receiving that offer.
Sign of validation. It's interesting that you say this, Patrick. Would you say it's a sign of validation that those investors should be selling, or a sign of validation that the underlying business is still worth backing?
If you don't have a close-ended fund cycle, meaning, for those who don't mean what that means, or know what that means, or have never heard the term, closed-ended funds are most VC funds. That means you have a finite fund lifetime after which you're held to liquidate your positions and find ways to actually distribute cash and not pay in kind, meaning shares, to the LPs. So if you don't have that close-ended model, you have more of an open-ended model. I think you will be thinking hard about a lot of these positions. Of course, you can always disagree maybe with the judgment of the buyer because you're privy to more and better information through having worked with the company. So you might be disagreement in the value, but it will at the very least trigger you maybe reevaluating your position, because if an outside person actually thinks that the macro for the business is potentially good and that what they see in the business numbers, because these are typically numbers driven transactions,
Yeah.
is quite good, I think it will make you think again whether the business might actually be correctly valued in the mid to long term.
Yeah.
Now, if you have a closed-ended fund, you might be ending, whatever your fund in 2 years, so that then it becomes a different position, and you have a different reason to also liquidate.
Yeah. I wonder, and this interestingly goes back to something we were discussing just earlier this episode, but also ties in with something we were discussing just last Friday. I wonder if, in the context of cyclical businesses and cycles in so many things, if this is an example of buying at the bottom of the cycle,
Mm.
uh, and therefore you sort of timed the market. Look, I think very smart people have said timing is perhaps the most important thing. Sometimes
Mm.
I think I agree to it to a certain extent, not maybe to the fullest extent. But there is something to be said about um, backing, quote unquote, with deep conviction, businesses at the very top of the cycle without clarity over how things would materialize if we bottomed out at the end of or at the end of the cycle. And maybe if you're aware of the cyclicality of these businesses or in the nature of access to capital, if you buy at the bottom of the cycle, it may be a very good strategy if the underlying business has some value to it
I
eventually.
actually think this is a data point that we're nearing the bottom of the cycle or at it. I mean, these are fluid events, so it's hard to pinpoint it to a day. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
So it's more of a stretch of time.
Hmm.
And so we might already be in it. I have multiple data points to support that thesis. Let me not get into those right now, just because we're
Hmm.
discussing this in the context of the secondary buyers. I take the secondary buyers' behavior as a sign. So the secondary buyers who are established large funds who come from macro strategies, that's the set that I look at. These secondary buyers I take as a data point that we're in the middle of the bottom of the side of the in the middle of the bottom, and that the cycle has ended. Why? I really admire I admire VCs who come with macro strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you need a lot more than just a macro strategy. Having just a macro strategy makes you usually a pretty dumb investor, but starting with macro strategies, think
Mm-hmm.
coat, right? So if you see the big picture economics, hey, there's a skilled labor shortage in market A in that specific vertical, and I want to back certain businesses that can actually fix it with model A. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
macro strategy. That makes a lot of sense to start with. You need a lot more detail and insight, but it makes you. So I admire funds like that because I think in principle that will typically make you the right bets. There's a timing element
Mm-hmm.
that you're speaking about that will put you there. And so the fact that these macro investors, macro starting investors that have a long history and a long track record and have a great reputation are timing the market like this right now tells me that from a macro perspective, they believe we're at the bottom of the cycle.
Yeah, I would have to agree. It definitely fills me with quite a bit of optimism around being actively investing right now, because that's
Mhm.
actually a, I mean, if it wasn't already obvious, it's a great time both to be investing and to be starting new companies. Um, I'm also curious to see how this next cycle plays out. It's
Mhm.
always so fascinating, especially when you are in the midst of it. It's so hard to remove yourself from it and say, oh, no, this is just the top of the cycle, so I'll remove myself and I'll not buy, etc. So often, I think it's the hardest part of an investor, and I think also the hardest part if you're a founder also getting swept up in the cycle, to not sort of put all your eggs in that basket and to remind yourself that it could come crashing down.
Do you remember Web3?
Oh wow, I haven't heard that in quite a while, my friend. Quite a while.
It's not that long ago. Huh? I mean, that was a
Yeah,
thing in 2021. And I mean, how long did that hype last? Give it a year, maybe.
maybe. Yeah.
So is when you think of that in the context of the AI craze that we've been discussing here so much,
Hmm.
is that the prediction that a lot of the AI craze and hype will go away and funding will crash for um, a lot of companies that should have never gotten funding? Is that the prediction?
Yeah. So I think in response to the way you specifically phrased your question, yeah, my answer would be yes. I
Okay.
think a lot of companies, um, either under the guise or the broad umbrella of AI, in the early stage have gotten way more money, orders of magnitude more money than they should,
Yeah.
um, at valuations that assume such an incredibly rosy future for the next few years. Not
Yeah.
months, mind you, next few years. A lot of incredible things need to happen one after the other flawlessly for those valuations to be justified. If even one thing doesn't happen, it's very likely for those specific companies the whole thing will just implode.
I
So yeah,
agree
I,
with
I
that.
I think that will happen.
A lot of that happened in Web3, really. And I know there will be fanboys out there that will now say, "Yeah, but Web3 had no inherent technology, but AI does." Think about whether you really believe that. So it's vertical AI, different topic. That's not what I'm discussing. I'm talking about the bigger AI picture that gets a lot of funding. And
Yeah.
just to call this out, also, uh, I hate the hypocrisy behind some of VC investments, right? So we have never done a Web3 deal, which means we also don't get to have a deeper opinion or get to enjoy any deeper success in the few Web3 companies that actually found success.
Yeah.
But again, I look at it macro and I'm saying this is just not value generative enough or defensible enough for me to believe in it, and so I'm not making an investment there. So we have never done that in Web3. We do have AI investments, but vertical AI investments, not
Yeah.
generic. Oh, let's build the open AI for Europe. I'm like, oh my god. I mean, it. But
Yeah.
okay. And so the hypocrisy piece here is that there's one investor in the US that actually they count themselves as one of the most premier like science tech, hard tech investors, and a
Hmm.
specific partner on that firm until 2 years ago went around, including their website. You can actually go to the web archive and look up that fund's website and tout Web3 as the next best thing, to the degree where he said, if you're not in Web3, you're not a good investor. That was the
Oh,
message.
wow. Wow. Okay.
Go on that website now. It's completely wiped from the website. It's like they want to pretend they never said that idiocy, right? And so now, what do they hype, Shub? Take a guess.
AI, generative
Yeah,
AI, large, LLMs.
exactly.
Yeah.
I really cannot understand why LPs don't do a better diligence sometimes on just the statements, the random
Mhm.
arbitrary shit that some VCs put out there all the time and never get held accountable for.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what do I tell you? I think I think it may take at least one more cycle or another bubble bursting for a little bit more accountability. I'm not saying it'll be resolved, but unfortunately, that's how I think. I think if you take the overall evolution of VC as an asset class or as an industry, I think we still need a few more bubbles to burst and a few more cycles of our own. So to fully understand all the madness that's going on.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe, but humankind doesn't have a great history of learning
Or remembering.
over
Yeah,
generations. Yeah,
I think to learn, we first need to remember. It is actually quite frightening how easily we go into amnesia. I have to say,
yeah,
it is
yeah.
really frightening. Yeah.
Pooh, that's a hard note to leave this show on. So
Wow.
let's do the regular. What's in your calendar next week? You're looking forward to?
Oh, there's two, three interesting opportunities, actually, largely staying along the themes that I've spoken about in recent episodes. So one firm, for example, does a lot. I think very carefully and subtly avoiding mentioning AI, but employing big data analytics, etc., to the use of contracts in construction. I
Hmm.
find that problem statement and the manner of deploying it very compelling. So very keen to dig in even further. Believe it or not, doing even more work on what we've uncovered thus far on the freight rates, what that means for firms in this space, and so on. So doing a bit more work there. And there's a few other opportunities on our plate on the skilling side, on the export of blue collar workers from emerging markets to um, Western Europe, Canada, for example. There's a couple of opportunities that we have looking at that. So it's a theme which I think have been excited about it for a while, digging in deeper and deeper into specific opportunities.
Is that a? Do you see a specific market around the world where that has a bigger application, or is it actually one of the few global plays in construction tech?
When you say that, it's actually quite fascinating. I think um, if I were to classify it as the receiver country, as in the country that is right now in a deficit, I think Western Europe and Canada are right now the because you have to keep in mind because we're talking about immigration, what you need is the problem statement doesn't just end with, "Hey, we have a shortage of people, so cool, so now we're ready to
Right.
go," right? Which also makes this problem statement so complex and fascinating, also very intellectually stimulating. So what you also need is collectively as a society, as a legislative system, to fully acknowledge and get behind it,
Yes.
right? If as a society you say, no, this problem doesn't exist, blah blah, we don't need people. I mean, it doesn't matter, no, how much worse it gets, it'll not be resolved. I think what did I mean what
Japan, by the way, falls into that category for
Right.
20 years.
Absolutely right. And I'm glad you said that, right? So which is, and obviously that, in spite of all the political rhetoric or any other rhetoric, that effect eventually shows 10 or 20 years down the line,
Yeah.
right? I think right now, if you were to do, and by the way, it's actually quite easy to do, if you were to just do a sense check, just do an internet search on these themes, you'll find Western Europe and Canada actually are on the forefront on these themes, really getting behind the idea of enabling inbound blue collar worker migration, doing all they can to simplify the procedures.
Nice.
Yeah,
Well, as
so
a European, I like to hear that.
I have to say, I mean, and I think the information is also out there in public domain. Germany actually has one of the most simplified immigration regimes now for blue collar workers, and also for otherwise actually. And I
Not
believe it's
a,
been even further.
I can attest, not everything perfect here in the bureaucracy, but a lot of stuff that floats around, especially around social, that is just plain wrong. If
Yeah.
it's the bureaucracy is actually much simpler than in many countries
I
in
think
the Western
if
world.
you are either a founder or anyone else interested just generally in this human migration problem statement, right? It's really quite fascinating. Western Europe in general, and I'm specifically saying Western Europe, right? So this doesn't extend to Northern Europe or other
Mm.
parts of Europe. Specifically, Western Europe, it actually operates in a very cohesive and unified approach, where they have accepted it as a necessity that needs to be solved immediately, and in many cases legislations have already been passed to enable it. So they're actually at least one or two steps ahead of many other countries who are still either in acceptance phase or in discussion phase and so on and so forth, which obviously as a VC for these opportunities, you're still at the whims of legislation, for better or worse, so you can't like assume it'll all go in your favor. So in Western Europe and Canada, I would say the governments, to their credit, have been on the problem statement.
Yeah, I mean the wound is deep. It's open. So I mean, bringing it full circle, truck drivers 500,000 short today, 1.5 million by 2030. Okay, I mean,
Yeah.
what do you do? Want to have your economy plummet or want to actually have people produce? So
Yeah.
easy choice. Yeah, in my calendar, I have a skin cancer screening next week. That's going to be awesome. And speaking actually with my favorite group of software executives next week, that's
Mhm.
always we're going to discuss a few themes, trends. That's always actually a really fun chat with them, where I learn a
Mhm.
lot. So that's amazing. And with a bricklaying robotics founders that
Nice.
I mentioned today,
I'm sure
that's
that'll
going
be
to be
fun.
fun. That's a pretty kick-ass team.
Awesome.
Great, sir.
Great.
Always fun.
I mean, this was fun, man. I mean, it's not always fun just hanging out with you, but I have to admit, even this episode was fun.
Good. Well, I know you would rather start early into the weekend, but glad to hear it was fun.
Oh, it was, man. It was.
Nice.
I wouldn't, for all our differences, wouldn't miss a chat with you.
Thanks, sir. Thanks, sir. And then next week we'll finally have Yvonne from Local Globe on.
That would be the next episode, you mean?
Ah,
Two
that's
weeks
right.
from
Not next
now.
week.
Yeah.
2 weeks. That's right.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, you can tune in next week, but we won't be there.
Cool.
All right.
I'll keep that ship sailing.
All right, sir. Hey, happy weekend.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.